we're going to talk about Oh Captain, My Captain today, and we might get to a little bit of patterns, but mostly we're talking still about um, imagery. And so we're going to mostly finish up Oh Captain, My Captain. And then we have two other poems that are in what was due, I think, Friday. And so we had Patterns by Amy Lowell and, oh my goodness, what is the other poem? Now I can't remember it all of a sudden. Let's just look. And The Hollow Men by T.S. Eliot, which is probably one of the most difficult poems we're going to deal with. Although, as far as his poem's concerned, it's one of his better ones. Patterns is sad, but it's one of my personal favorites. If I were ever a famous poet who wrote a really good poem, that would be that. And honestly, Poe, I love a lot of his poems too. But who knows? I like a lot of poetry, so. But yeah, Patterns is sad, but it's beautifully written, I think, too. And so we'll at least get started on it today, but if not, it's no big deal. We still have two chats tomorrow, and I can't really talk about anything from Journal 9 on because it's not due until Wednesday night. And so I don't want to talk about anything in a chat before it's due. I never want to ruin something for somebody when the due date it hasn't even happened yet. That's not fun. I've hated, I don't know how you guys feel, but I hate it when someone ruins a movie for me. And, I'm going to go see something or other, and they tell me the end. It makes me so upset. I just, yes, there are movies where you know the end, like Titanic, sort of, but I just I don't like people telling me what's going to happen. I like being surprised. So I will never cover anything. So we probably won't cover Elizabeth Barrett Browning's poem. My guess is I'll cover it with my 1102 class, my other 1102 class on Thursday morning, but I will post that video for you guys anyway. So, but so today we'll pretty much talk about Oh Captain, My Captain in its entirety, and then start talking about patterns, especially as we talk about metaphor. And it's funny because we're talking about metaphor in that journal, and yet there are very, very strong metaphors in Oh Captain, My Captain. And so we're going to use that. We're going to use that as kind of a segue to what's going on. The only thing is we haven't talked about Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. I just realized that, and I'm not going to let that get away. So we're going to talk about that one first. Then we'll talk about Oh Captain, My Captain. And both, unfortunately, I didn't realize I was picking all this, but there are a lot of poems dealing with death, and I'm really sorry if people are getting depressed because that just kind of happens. But um, in this poem and in the next one, one is addressed to a person, and the other one is to. But in the other one, the other Oh Captain, My Captain, it's actually addressed to a person who has died. And so, but both are being addressed to essentially someone that the person doesn't want to lose. And so in some ways they're linked in that way. So let's talk about Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night. And let's start with, and you can look at the rhyme scheme. It's a very unusual one, mainly because this Dylan Thomas is a British author, but this is a rhyme scheme that's actually more tricky than many because it's pretty much, I mean, there's a lot of repetition, so it's not like it's just that, but you'll notice that so it says night and then day, light, then right, they, night. So it's essentially ABA, ABA, ABA. Yeah, it's very difficult. And I notice how I'm not asking you to write a villanelle. And there are a few other ones that I'm not going to ask you to write because they're just too hard. Now, he picks a rhyme those are easier. You can find a lot of words that rhyme with day. There's stay and, way and pray and delay. And I mean, you could just stack them all up. But still, it's not an easy poem to write for that reason. And it's not about I mean, the rhyme scheme isn't really the point of this one, though. And so what we're going to do is essentially we're talking about one very long extended metaphor. Okay, when he says, do not go gentle into that good night. Do you remember the sonnet that Shakespeare wrote? Thou seest in me The twilight of such day. Do you remember that? Okay, Jordan, you say yes. Do you remember it, Callie? Where he talks about the twilight. Okay, good. Yeah, I like it's one of my favorites of his because it again though has those metaphors. And so each metaphor or each image that he presents, the twilight is the first quatrain, and the second one is that like essentially the end of, well, I think the first one actually is fall, and then the second one is a twilight, and the third one is a dying fire. But it's essentially saying you see in me an old person who's close to death. But it's this idea too that at the end of the day, that each day is its own lifespan. So night is the metaphor for death. So, or the near the end of death anyway. You're about to die. In this case, Dylan Thomas is using exactly the same metaphor, but in a very different way. He's not saying, don't die, don't die, don't die. He's saying, do not go gentle into that good night. But the same good night, that good night is death, that, peaceful sleep or whatever. And all he's saying, he's actually written this for his father. And it always reminds me of another person, and it's a very weird thing that I just learned about. I'm a huge fan, and I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie. I always bring up weird stuff in here, but I'm a huge fan of Princess Bride. Not the book, but the movie. I actually didn't like the book, but I love the movie. And have you guys seen Princess Bride? Because if you have not, then this is your assignment. Okay, it is so wonderful. It is one of my favorite movies ever. Okay, and it's good for all ages. So little kids can watch it. So if you have little kids at home, they'll love it. Just my kids love it. They loved it. I loved it when I was actually in college when it came out, or late high school. I don't know, but it's so good, so good, such a good movie. But in it, there's a specific person. There's one of the character. He's a Spaniard, and his father was murdered, and he's looking for revenge. And he says every single time he says, when I see this man who killed my father, he says, I'm going to say, my name is Inigo Montoya. You killed my father. Prepare to die. And so he says this, like, in the movie, he says it like 10 times. Well, they did a redo of the movie. They actually did a reading of it live over the internet during COVID. And they had the only person they didn't have who was original, well, the cast member had passed away. And so he was played by someone else. But the person who played Inigo Montoya revealed that his father was dying of cancer when he did the movie. And so when he said that, he was essentially saying this to cancer, like, you killed my father, prepare to die. And made it so he was so impassioned when he gave this line in the movie, because he really cared. This became, I mean, it's beautiful. And you can actually find the recording of the WebEx, like the teams. I don't know how they even broadcast it through something, but you can find it online now and you can see them read it. But honestly, go see the movie. Like, go get it. I think I bought it for $5 on Amazon on DVD, and it's so worth watching. It is, but you could probably rent it on YouTube. You could probably watch it on YouTube with ads. So it's so much fun. But that same thing, when you think about someone that's very close to you, and, especially when they're struggling, you want them to fight. You don't want them to just give up and waste away to nothing. If they're battling cancer, or they're battling, they're struggling with an illness, or if they're struggling with addiction, or they're struggling, whatever it is, you want them to keep fighting. If they're in a war, you don't want them to just give up their life. You want them to come home safe. And so if nothing else, if they die, you want them to die having done as much good as they could, but the struggle matters. And so in this case, this passion comes out. He's very upset, and he's not angry, but he's desperate. And I think that desperation comes out in his lines too. But all of it is metaphorical. He doesn't say, and you've probably heard this, don't die. He doesn't say that to his dad. He essentially, through this more formal speech, tries to tell his dad, just keep fighting, don't give up, and don't go gentle, don't let it just happen, don't give up on the struggle, keep struggling. And so but he uses this all metaphorical. So he says, do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close it. In other words, don't, just because you're old doesn't mean you can just not care if you die. You need to struggle just as much. And then he tells them, rage, rage against the dying of the light. And that's still against essentially the dying of their own light. So the end of their life. And so each one of these little stanzas, this 3-line stanza, is saying the same thing over and over, but in slightly different ways. So the wise men at their end know dark is right. Like, death is coming. You know that everybody's going to meet death. Because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. In other words, if they feel like they haven't changed, their words haven't meant enough and mattered enough to the people they leave behind, then they struggle. They don't want to give up, and they don't want to rest and let go of something that they feel isn't finished. So good men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay, rage, rage against the dying of the light. So crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. So in other words, that even good men who wanted to do good things don't feel like they've done enough. Yeah, and it's a lot of it is too, it's kind of like Kipling's poem. It's, what do you do with the time you have? And people who have this purposeful life, who feel that what they do matters. Yeah, that's Keats. Yeah, absolutely. And that's another sonnet where he says, where he's afraid he's going to die before he gets anything accomplished. And that's, for people who live that kind of purposeful life, no matter how much they do accomplish, they will always, they don't want it to end because they feel like there's so much they didn't get done. And I think that's the life that's worth living, is the one where you really go out and do all you possibly can, not to make yourself famous or anything, but to change the world, to make people better people, to make the world a better place than the one you were born into, to make everything better, that you can, to make people happy around you, to make people feel loved, to make, whatever it is that you believe in, to make people, I mean, even to make people smarter. Maybe it's your math teacher who just goes to work every day wanting to help people understand math, and even when they get to be 85 years old, and I mean, we had one, actually two math teachers here. Both of them retired from high school teaching, and yet they were in their 80s still teaching. And they just didn't want to stop, because to them, that was the reason they got up in the morning. And so he's saying the same thing. So whether you were wise men, just, first there's old men, old people. It doesn't mean that you just give up just because your death seems near. Well, I think too, that's, and having, Jordan, having an afterlife of some kind, and different faiths deal with it differently. Some have some type of heaven, some eternal existence. Some do it through reincarnation, where you come back and live another life and another life until you reach this level of nirvana, or enlightenment or something. But the truth is we don't, and we certainly don't want to think that all that we did in life didn't matter, or we never got to the point where something in our life really mattered to someone else. That's the most awful feeling that, and there are there people who feel this way? Yes, there are, and it's the saddest thing where they feel like they don't matter, like even to another person. There's another movie. I can't believe I keep talking about these movies, but they matter. Um, Dear Evan Hansen, the musical, and there's a movie version of it, and it's very watchable too. But I've seen it in. Saw the touring show of the musical, and but the movie I recommend it. It's not as fantastic as Princess Bride, but it's great in its own way. But it deals with a child who had really gotten on in the spiral with drugs, and he was dealing with, you know, he was just in a dark place. And a lot of these kids are kind of struggling with similar things. And there's even a song called You Were Not Alone. And it's essentially the fact that so many people feel like they are, and that that no one cares and no one even notices. Yeah, it's Dear, I'll just write it in here. But it's a good, and it's a great musical if you have like teenage kids. It's a great thing to watch with them. My daughter and son, we took our two kids to it. But it's dealing with, how do you keep going when you feel like you don't matter to anybody? And it's really hard. You realize how much that's sad. And that, I mean, he's talking about that, but he's saying, no, even wise men fight. Even good men haven't done enough good and they fight. And then he goes on to even wild men, okay, so who caught and sang the sun in flight. So they're like the partiers, the I don't know, the pirates or something. The guys who went out and drank every weekend or whatever, but they learned too late. They grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that. So even the ones who did, maybe you could call them wasting time, but they went out and we do. And the song actually says, essentially it's called You Will Be Found. And it's saying that, you may think you're alone, but you're not, and we're going to find you, and you will always have, you will all more people care about you than you think they do. But I mean, it's got some sadness to it, but it's a good, I don't know, I really like the musical. I strongly recommend it. Even if you don't like musicals, honestly. My son does not. He thinks musicals are weird, okay? But it's still, it can speak to almost anybody, parents especially, but kids too, teenagers especially. Okay, so then we have grave men near death. So these are, and he uses the word grave kind of, I mean, he's not talking about like serious men. He's talking about men who are close to the grave. I mean, he is talking about serious men because they know their lives are almost over. So, um, and who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay, rage, rage. So they know, they see things and they understand things that the rest of us don't understand because we're not so close to death. And they even say, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. And that means gay actually means happy. So they're both fiery and happy, but they rage against the dying of the light. And then it finally gets to, it's kind of like, that's why I said it's like Kipling. It's getting to the end of it. He says, and you, my son, remember in that poem. Well, this is what Dylan Thomas is dealing with. And he says, and you, my father, there on the sad height, like at that pinnacle where he's about to go into death, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. In other words, I want to see, I'm willing to take the struggle and be with you during the struggle. Do not go gentle into that good night. So he starts right here, that first line. And then the last line, rage, rage, is the same line you see in every other stanza. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And the truth is, it's a really hard thing. Well, I imagine, to die, to face one's death. But it's also really, really hard to be a person taking care of that person and loving that person who's facing death. It's hard to watch another person struggle. Yes, no, this actually, it's one of those weird, um, it's kind of like, the Sir Philip Sidney, who was really, writing a sonnet to a lovely woman he claimed to be in love with, and he really was. But no, this is one of those rare things. It's kind of like Kipling's in that yes, you can see a persona in it, and yet he was writing it on the it's much more of a confessional poet, because he's really writing to dad and trying to get him to keep struggling. But no, that's right. And that is a persona. But you could certainly contend that it wasn't really him and he was just creating this, or maybe he wrote it and it was published well after his father died or something. But our understanding is that he wrote it for his father before his father died. And yet there's a futility to it. I mean, the truth is no matter how much you fight, no one can escape death. We will all, and no one gets, it's like, Jordan, I know you read Everyman because we were talking about it, but no one gets to be immortal in this lifetime. We're all mortal. We will all end, and we all have to face that. And yet, do we have to face it complacently, or should we struggle and do as much as we can and be as good as we can, and make as much of a difference as we can before and it's okay to say, I don't want to go right now. I've joked with my husband, because we don't talk about death a lot because he doesn't like it, but it makes him uncomfortable. But I told him, I said, no matter what, I'll probably be mad when I finally die, because there will be so many things I haven't done yet. And it's like, okay, yeah, he'll probably sit there and go, well, you've done this, you've done this, you've done this, And I'll be like, yeah, but I didn't get this done, I didn't get that done, and I was going to start this, and then we didn't even do that. I have all these projects, and I'm never going to get them all done. So, I think too, that's very much part of what he's talking about, that, the good men didn't get everything they wanted done. The wise men didn't have enough, like their words didn't do enough while they were alive. Every single one of them feels like they haven't gotten enough of what it is. Yeah. Well, and the truth is, we don't have to face it alone, even if we're physically alone. I mean, even knowing, and of course I look at death, I'm not afraid, but if we believe in where we're going, and or what our life means, there's so much of a commonality to it, and I've taken care of people, just on little, like, where you sign up and you hang out with people who are invalids or whatever. And I knew one lady, and she was just the most adorable woman, but she knew when she was going to die, and she was at peace with it. Other people were not, and she struggled with it, but because she knew they were in pain, but she knew that she was okay. And I hope, even though he doesn't want his dad to stop struggling in this poem, I would hope that everybody gets to that point where they're like, okay, it's all right. Yeah, I don't know that I've ever felt. There are times, I think, in my life where I felt like at least people around me weren't with me. Like I was alone, even part of a huge family. I felt alone, but I didn't feel alone, because I always felt like there was somebody with me, even if I couldn't see him. So I don't know. Anybody watching the video, you guys are like, wow, this is really weird and existential. I don't even know. But I mean, the truth is, these kinds of things, and it's just like music. That's why I, equate so much of this with music. Is music touches us because there are so many human feelings and human conditions that we share, even if it's just for little points in our lives. And those songs speak to us and to those points and those memories, or to our present state sometimes. And they can help us find ways out. and know that we're not alone. Even the fact that other people go through what we go through it can be comforting. Oh, the way she would die. That I understand. Honestly, I always worry about the people that I leave behind. And I think that will always be what bothers me the most. So, okay. So, any other things we want to say about do not go gentle into that good night? And if there's something that you have a particular question, especially Callie, if there's anything that, and you're just like, wow, I can't believe we got so existential. That's okay. Just feel free to share. Okay, we're not doing that. We're not doing YouTube. I'm going to move things around because I can't see things. Okay, we're not doing patterns yet. We're going to do, oh, Captain, my Captain, because we want to be depressed. And this is yet another poem about death. No, it's not. It's not. It is, but it isn't. And it is sad. And I'm not going to say, but it isn't, because no, it is sad. It's sad. So, but let's look at this one. Now, there's a historical basis for, background for this poem as well. Did you guys figure out who it was? And it's okay if you say no, I don't. I don't have a clue. Because that's why we have this session. Hopefully people will watch this because remember we're talking about, okay, so we have two levels to this. That's why this is an imagery in the imagery section, because it's a metaphor, because Walt Whitman was writing, I mean, from the beginning, if you watch it all the way through, if you read through this whole thing, it's talking about what? There's a ship, and it went out and did something. They did something great. They won the battle. The prize we sought is won, all that stuff. And the bugle trills, everybody's there to welcome the boat back, right? And they're all celebrating and everything like that. But what happened to the captain? Okay, so the but we're getting there. It's not quite. The captain's dead, and the captain is literally on the deck of the ship, dead. Okay, so everybody's, they won the war, they won the battle, the prize we sought is won. Everybody's, they're coming back into shore in the boat, and the captain is dead on the deck of the ship. Okay, so that's the cover story. So this is, and so you think about this too. There are times when this happens. You're in a battle and the battle is won, and yet the people that we really care about in that battle die fighting. In this case, though, it never says that but the captain died in battle. It just says, so we've been traveling back. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting. Like, this is the time to celebrate, but oh no, look on the deck, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. And so we don't know why he's dead. So they don't, in fact, the people out there cheering don't even know he's dead. They're just like, yay, we won, we won, we won. And they don't realize that the main person who was kind of in charge of everything is dead. He's gone. And so he says, he's addressing the captain, oh, captain, my captain, rise up and hear the bells. Like, hear the celebration. Don't die, because everybody, we've won. Yeah, it's like that. Like they went off to battle and then they came back victorious. That's what it feels like. And it says, for you the bugle trills, for you bouquets and ribbon wreaths, for you the shores a crowd. And it's like all of this. Everybody's here to see you. Here, Captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head. It is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. And so he says, I can't believe you're dead. Like, this is such a shock. And nobody knows. And like, this is the one person, this persona of this poem, who sees it. And they find out before other people on the shore realize it. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. Now he calls him father too. So this is important because we'll get to that. So he's his captain and his father. He has no pulse nor will, but now the ship is anchored safe and sound. So he's taking care of the problem, and the ship's come back victorious and safe. Its voyage closed and done. And so everybody can celebrate. But I with mournful tread walk the deck. My captain lies, fallen cold and dead. Now this was actually part of Leaves of Grass, which Walt Whitman wrote. Walt Whitman, though, okay, so now do you get the over story? So here's this ship coming back into shore. Everybody's happy, 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 and they don't realize that the captain's dead, except for this persona who's talking, and he's trying to get the captain to wake up. Captain doesn't wake up. That's it. So that's the upper story. Now, Walt Whitman wrote most of his stuff during the sorry, somebody's messaging me. He wrote most of his poetry around the Civil War, and he was actually in the Civil War not as a soldier but as a medic. And so there are quite a few poems he's written where he talks about what it's like to be a medic. And at that time, this is not like medicine today. Somebody gets shot in the leg and they cut the leg off to prevent gangrene. I mean, it was pretty much most surgeons at that time, their job was to cut off the limbs so that people didn't get gangrene and die. And so it was a really bloody business. And Walt Whitman was very much no antibiotics, very little. They didn't have anything modern like painkiller type stuff. It was, here's some alcohol and bite this piece of leather. I mean, even then, I mean, it's very primitive, and they didn't even understand things like, washing your hands and, don't, if that thing is bloody, you don't put it on somebody else, so there's a lot of spreading of disease. It was bad. But Walt Whitman, honestly, for him, it was even worse because essentially it made him a pacifist. He felt that war itself was the ugliest, most horrible thing ever. At the same time, though, he understood why it had to happen, and that's because he was fighting in the Civil War, and he was on the side of the North. So this is not a Southern attack, and this is Walt Whitman. I mean, though he did travel all over the United States, he was more of a New Englander kind of poet. And he absolutely did not believe in slavery. He thought slavery was an abomination. And he had, even as a young man, he actually got fired off of a newspaper because he talked against that and said that, brought up all sorts of other volatile topics and offended a bunch of people. But when he saw the war, I mean, essentially all he could see was the brutality of it. And that really bothered him. And so this poem, though, and it's one of his very few, he was one of the first poets to write in free verse. So most of his poems have no rhyme, no regular rhythm. And Leaves of Grass, for instance, which is a a book-length poem, and it's right here. That poem, a lot of people don't even didn't at that time anyway, see it as poetry because it didn't have a regular rhyme scheme. And he wrote about stuff that a lot of people thought you shouldn't write about. Like he'd write about big cities and the smell of big cities, and he'd write about people and people of all different walks of life, butchers and bakers and prostitutes, and I mean anybody. He just found people amazing. and he just celebrated life. He was that kind of a guy. Well, in this case, though, he's talking about one very specific person. And so this is where the metaphor comes in. So this ship that is coming back is essentially the ship of the war. And he's talking about that Northern Army winning the war. They've won. The United States isn't splitting up into pieces. The Emancipation Proclamation is passed. We've won the battle, essentially, against slavery, and people are elated, and it's all over, right? And what happened historically after the war was over? What was one big event that happened after the end of the Civil War? Who died?
Oh, Abraham Lincoln.
Yes. President Abraham Lincoln. And that's really, and he was president at the time. And do you remember how he died?
At the theater.
Yes, at
Got
Ford
shot.
Theater in Washington, D.C. If I could just type, for goodness sakes. He was at the Ford Theater and he was essentially assassinated. He was shot in the back of the head while people were in the theater watching a play by John Wilkes Booth and other conspirators who all came together and did that. But he died, and it was a shock. It was sudden. It was horrifying. And it's probably, I mean, I know like I was not alive when JFK was assassinated, but my mom still remembers where she was when it happened. I remember where I was when President Ronald Reagan was shot at by Hinckley, John Hinckley, I think his name was. I don't know. I remember, we all remember, well, you guys probably are too young, but I remember where I was when 9/11 happened. And so, you know, when we have these kinds of attacks, these are things that are seminal events in all of our lives, all of those who are living at the time. And so for Walt Whitman, this became, I mean, it's kind of probably how he could write it is through a big extended metaphor, because it was so horrifying to him. And so here's this ship coming in. We've won the war, but our captain is dead. And people, it takes a while for people to even realize it happened. You know, we didn't have like phones and internet and television at this time. And so, I mean, there were people, honestly, there were armies that were still fighting the Civil War and a year after it ended, because they were out in the Midwest and they didn't know it had ended yet. And so the same thing, it took a long time for people to get the news that Abraham Lincoln was dead. And I'm sure there were people who didn't believe it. And so just as we get to the point where, wow, this is all of this suffering is over and the best outcome happened, that we didn't end up splitting up as a country, we're all together, and yet we've also freed slaves. And people, so, but you know, all of a sudden the celebrating is interrupted because the person who really pushed all of that, who really guided us through all of it, is dead. And so this is his, you know, it's funny too, there's another movie, I can't believe I'm using another movie, but oh, what's it called? Why can I not remember what it's, oh, Dead Poet Society, with Robin Williams in it. If you're a big fan of Robin Williams, don't honestly, I watched it in the movie theater when it came out, long billion times, you know, years ago, but I also watched it after he passed away, and I shouldn't have done that. He's one of my favorite actors. So see, I remember when the Challenger exploded. I was in the 10th grade, and I watched it live. I was in the library skipping lunch so I could watch it, and I was absolutely devastated. My daughter, honestly, she wasn't even a year old, so she was 9 months old at that time, at 9/11. So, but it's funny. I mean, there tend to be moments like that, right? And so the captain is the father figure, and he's the director. He's the one who tells people, okay, you go here and you go here, and we'll get this done. You know, he's the coordinator. He's the one who inspires people. He's the everything. And the fact that Walt Whitman saw him as a father figure as well, um, is absolutely true. So yeah, the fact that you guys point that out is really smart. So, but in Dead Poet Society, the kids in the movie actually call him "Oh Captain, my Captain," the teacher who introduces all these poets to them. And at the end, they give him a kind of chant, "Oh Captain, my Captain," you know. But it's to show that kind of guide, and that's really, it shows too the devotion, and it shows it very much is reflecting this poem, because Walt Whitman so admired Abraham Lincoln, and for him he was such a force of peace, and then he was dead, and it was just devastating. And so this is it's really an elegy, and I'll let me write this in here. It's because it's a poem that's given to, you know, written for someone who has died. I was actually at school teaching when 9/11 happened, and my son hadn't been born. So when he wanted to be a cop for the longest time, and then we went through the 10-year anniversary of it. Oh no. Yeah, you got to be careful what you watch on YouTube. I had to vet some things so I could show essentially a 6-year-old, almost 7-year-old, what 9/11 was, and he decided he didn't want to be a cop after that, because he saw so much devastation. All the cops who went and saved people or tried to, and then gave their lives for that. So, but the truth is, and I think, you know, I've been to the museum in New York City. It's one of those places I honestly, I think everyone should go visit. It's kind of like the Holocaust Museum, just like Washington, D.C. Everyone should go and visit. Every American citizen should go and visit Washington, D.C. It's and at least once, if not more than once, because there's so much history there, and there's so much that we need to learn from these things, even the sad stuff. It's better to learn what's real and what really happened, so we don't ever, hopefully, ever have to go through this kind of thing again. But in this case, though, I mean, Walt Whitman was pouring, I mean, it was all metaphor, and yet he was pouring out that same pain. He just did it through that metaphorical situation. So here's the captain on the ship, and yay, we're all done, but the captain's dead. And it's the shock of it is there, the suffering is there, the fact that he wants to wake up, the he can't believe it. You know, isn't this a dream? You know, is it some dream that on deck you've fallen cold and dead? Like, this can't be real. And yet and all the cheering doesn't, it's like it doesn't matter. And it's all for him. It's all for what he's been able to accomplish. And yet he's dead. And so he won't be able to hear the cheers. And it's really sad. And the truth is we have so much. I still remember that, and it's a poem. It's a song too, but oh, who's the guy? Alan Jackson. And it's called um, "Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning?" That's absolutely, for me, of all of the things, you know, especially as a new parent, I felt, because Crystal wasn't even a year old. That's absolutely about 9/11, and it's about that day, and it's essentially, what were you doing? And he goes through all these different situations where people could have been, and what they could have felt, and all of them resonate with me. So even the fact that there was one line where he says, "Oh, did you go home and kiss your children?" Like, you had to go and see your kids. That was the number one thing I wanted to do after it had happened. I went and taught. Actually, I heard about one airplane crash as I was walking to class, because I had class at 9:30, and it's the last thing I heard. We were in class, till 10:45, whatever, and I get out and they're like, "Oh my gosh, you will not believe what else happened." And everything had fallen apart by then. And then we were watching live when the buildings came down. I mean, it was, but that's the thing is when you have events like this, even, I mean, there are great events too, but this is one of those moments that you just, even if you want to forget it because it's so painful, you can't. And so it's, but it becomes one of those markers in your life. Yes. And I mean, the shock of it. And I don't, I've actually watched that more than once. I mean, again, it's unfathomable, at least for me. Of course, I'm not a member of a terrorist organization, but to do that level of harm, to know that you are causing the death of hundreds of people, or in the case of the World Trade Center towers, thousands of people who are just civilians, who are not like, but to feel, I don't even know how you get to that place where you can justify that level of violence. But that's, you just don't expect, that's so inhumane. It's not what humans are supposed to do. And it goes against everything I believe in. So, but that shock, it's shock we all felt because it's unbelievable. So, and in this case too, this was for Waltman, and it was unbelievable. And the truth is, when Ronald Reagan was shot, I was so, it's even though, I mean, yeah, I didn't know him. I never met Ronald Reagan. I've never met any of the presidents. It's There's still an ownership to that, no matter what side he's on, no matter what party they're in. That kind of stuff just shouldn't happen with the January 6th when they, uh, you know, essentially broke into the Capitol of in Washington D.C. I was devastated because I've been there. That's like, those horrible movies where people invade the White House. No, 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 no. That should never happen. When it's like the Las Vegas concert where this guy started shooting and he killed like 50 something people. That kind of stuff shouldn't happen. That people should not be that inhuman. So, I mean, they were. I think we were afraid to go into any public buildings, like anywhere where like malls and movie theaters and things like that. But the truth is, even today, think of how many drills we do for school shootings and things like that. And that's, most of those people are domestic terrorists. They're people in our own communities. And that's scary too. And that's the last thing you think about, little kids going to school. That's the last thing you want to see. There's another, and I'm not sure that we're reading it. Now I have to go back, y'all. Okay, let me go back. Let me see if I can. Okay, I'm gonna go and see for a second. I'm just making sure. But if we are, it's just another one to because it's also based on. I'm just looking. I'm gonna look at the journal readings for a second and see, because it's a really good. Oh, it is. Okay, in Poetry Journal 12, you're going to read another one that's really sad. It's Ballad of Birmingham. And that's based on an actual event that happened in Birmingham during the Civil Rights Movement. And so the truth is so much of what we've read is based on people's real lives. It's based on real. Okay, you had a question. Let's see. Let me look at your chat. Yeah, the personal footage is, I mean, honestly, so much of it is so hard. Even now, the video they're showing of the Gaza Strip and of um, like Israel is just horrible. I mean, all these people their stuff is destroyed, it's burned. their whole houses have been burned out. People are dead and lying. I mean, it's just that type of stuff it just shouldn't happen. So, okay, let's see. Personal footage. Okay, parents said yes, we were scared. It is, and it just shouldn't. It shouldn't be. Yes, it's the one that killed where the church was bombed and little girls, the little girls choir was practicing in the basement and they died. Like 4 girls died. And it's actually one of the events that shifted public opinion about the civil rights movement because churches are one of those places that, I mean, if you look at history and you see, like, if you go back into buildings, especially places where Islam and Judaism and Christianity have intersected, there are so many churches, Catholic churches, that used to be mosques, and so many mosques that used to be churches, Catholic churches, and they both recognize, like, no matter what religion you are, you recognize the holiness that is imbued in that building. And so that for so many years they were sanctuaries. That was where you go to escape being killed. To, even if you were a bad person, you go and you ask for sanctuary and they protect you from being killed. And so when people are murdered inside of a church, it's doubly horrible because I mean, it's kind of like a school. School should be the one place where kids are safe. And that's not just from like shootings, but from bullying and from um, feeling a sense of loss and desolation. They should be protected and feel safe. And so churches are. It would be great, Jordan. It would be. Mm, it would be, and I honestly, I don't know why differences so often lead to violence. I don't need everyone to agree with me for me to, I don't feel violent because people disagree with me politically, religiously, you know, about different social things. People are allowed to believe what they believe. And it just doesn't, I don't know. I've never had the urge to react violently to something like that. It's just so sad. This is just sad for me. So, okay, so we're almost done. So what I'm going to do is we're going to do patterns tomorrow morning, and then tomorrow night we'll do the Hollow Men. I like being nice to people. Well, honestly, I think and I don't know how you feel, Callie, but I think what people don't understand is that being nice to people actually makes you happier. That caring about other people and doing stuff for other people and thinking about other people and being unselfish, as long as you're not doing it to be a martyr, makes you a happier person. Don't do anything don't do things you resent doing, like give things to people and then get mad at them because they allow you to do that. No, no, no. But go be happy and do happy things. The happiest people I know are the nicest ones, the ones who go off and do nice things all the time for people. And they just get joy from that. And I think we get too selfish and we get closed-minded, and then we just can't, we think everybody else is making us miserable and we're kind of making ourselves miserable. So, and it's very isolating to be mean and hateful, and that it generates more of those feelings. Just like being kind and open and caring generates more of the positive feelings, being really standoffish and being hateful and angry, it engenders more of those feelings. So it's a cycle, either vicious or happy. And so it's a choice, I guess. But bad things still happen when we don't want them to, unfortunately, as these poems have attested. So, okay, so next time we're going to talk about Amy Lowell's patterns, and then tomorrow night, and we'll just, if we don't take the full hour, that's okay. And then tomorrow night we'll talk about the Hollow Men. So thank you two for coming. I've marked you both down, as being here, and I appreciate you guys because it's much easier to talk to people than not to talk to people. So have a good afternoon, and I will see you next time.
See you
Thank
tomorrow.
you. Bye.
Bye.